The harbour bell has just finished ringing the 5th hour of the evening when you notice the light has gone the colour of old amber. It happens gradually, the way most things in Thistlewick do. The afternoon had been pale and grey, the kind of grey that feels almost warm rather than cold, a soft woolen grey, the colour of the fog that had been sitting over the water since mid-morning. But somewhere in the last hour, while you were working, the grey has deepened. It has taken on a richness, a heaviness, the way thick cloth looks when the day's last light catches it at a low angle through the window. You notice it now from where you are standing behind the counter. The small window that faces the alley, the one that always lets in exactly the right amount of light, no more and no less, as though it made a private arrangement with the sun some years ago, is filling with that amber colour, and the glass, being old and slightly uneven, breaks it into wavering shapes across the dark wood of the counter. The shapes move slowly. They do not rush. They remind you of something you have seen before, though you couldn't say exactly what. Water, perhaps, or the way firelight moves on a low ceiling. The smell of the shop is all around you. Dried chamomile first, the way it always is, faintly sweet, faintly green, soft at the edges like something half-remembered. Beneath that, beeswax from the candles on the high shelf, the ones you keep lit more for the smell than for the light. And deeper still, underneath everything, the particular warm smell of the shop itself. Old wood, old stone, the dried herbs hanging from the ceiling that have been here so long they are more scent than substance now. Pennyroyal, valerian root, the remains of a bundle of lavender that has faded to silver-grey but still gives something, still offers something, when the air moves through it. Outside, somewhere down Sable Street, you can hear the cobblestones receiving the first of the evening's foot traffic. A slow sound. Not many people, just the ones who are heading home before the dark settles all the way in. The sound of their footsteps is muffled, as though the fog has come down off the water and curled itself around the street, softening everything it touches. You think it probably has. The fog comes early in late autumn. It comes in off the Saltmere and finds the harbour first, then winds its way through the lower lanes, past the dockmaster's office and the bakery on Cutter's Row, up through Market Square where it catches on the branches of the old oak tree and frays into wisps. By nightfall, on evenings like this one, it will be everywhere. It will be a thing you breathe rather than see. You don't mind it. You have lived in Thistlewick long enough to know the fog as a kind of company. It changes the quality of a sound. It makes the harbour bell, which rings now, again, one additional stroke that you weren't expecting, which means you misread the hour and it is already 5:30. It makes the bell sound rounder somehow. Less a strike of metal and more a thing that blooms and fades, like a breath. The amber light is shifting. The window is going dim. You set down the small glass rod you've been using to stir the batch you've been working on all afternoon. A clarity tonic, the third attempt, the first two having come out slightly too bitter, and you look around the shop the way you sometimes do near the end of the day. Not looking for anything in particular, just looking, just acknowledging it. The shelves are full. Not perfectly full. There are gaps here and there, places where bottles have been sold and not yet replaced, and there is one shelf near the door, the second from the bottom, where the wood has warped slightly over the years so that everything on it tilts 2 degrees to the left, and you have learned to account for this when placing bottles and to gently right them when visitors don't notice and knock one without meaning to. But full enough, rich enough. The amber and green and pale blue of the bottles catches the last of the day's light and holds it, and the shop looks, for a moment, like something out of a dream someone had once about what a potion shop should look like. It is, you think, almost exactly right. You breathe in the chamomile, the beeswax, the old wood and the older stone, the faint edge of something metallic from the copper pot on the workbench that still needs cleaning, and the sweeter note underneath it all, a dried rose hip, one of the last of the autumn batch, hanging just above the south window. You breathe out. The amber light fades another degree. It is time to close. Closing the shop is a quiet thing. It has its own rhythm, its own order, and the order matters, not because anything will go wrong if you do it differently, but because the order is itself calming. It is a way of ending the day with intention, of putting one thing to rest before moving to the next. You start with the candles on the high shelf. There are 7 of them up there, in varying states of use. The 2 on the far left have burned nearly to nothing. They will need replacing tomorrow or the day after, but the others are generous still, thick and pale, the kind that smell of beeswax rather than tallow, the kind that never smell of burning. You do not blow them out. You use the small brass snuffer that hangs on a hook just below the shelf, the one with the worn wooden handle, and you work from left to right, letting the bell of the snuffer hover for a moment over each flame before you lower it. The candles yield without complaint. The smoke rises from each one in a thin, wavering line, straight up in the still air of the shop, and then it curves and dissolves. When all 7 are out, the shop is lit only by the hearth in the back corner and the 2 candles on the counter that you will leave burning for yourself. The hearth is a small one, as hearths in Thistlewick go. It is meant for warmth rather than cooking, though you have used it for both. The fire there has been going since morning. You built it up with 2 good pieces of hardwood and a smaller piece of applewood, because applewood gives a smell when it burns that you find agreeable, and it has settled now into a deep, reliable burn, the kind that will hold for hours with very little attention. You take a moment to look at it. The flames are low. They are orange at their tips and deep red closer in, and the coals beneath them are a soft, moving gold, shifting and breathing in their slow way. There is no crackling just now. The fire has moved past the cracking stage into something quieter, a low, continuous exhale of sound, barely there, more felt than heard. You hold your hands out toward it for a moment. The warmth comes to meet you. It reaches your palms and the undersides of your fingers and the backs of your wrists, which are always the first to feel the cold. Your hands have been cool all afternoon. The clarity tonic requires working at the cooler end of the bench, away from the hearth, because some of the ingredients are sensitive to warmth in ways that you've had to learn through experience rather than any book. But now you let the fire put the warmth back. After a long moment, you lower your hands and go to the door. The lock is old. It is a heavy iron mechanism, the kind that was installed in the door many, many years before you came to keep this shop, and it makes a sound when you turn the key, a solid, satisfying thunk, the kind of sound that means something is properly done. You turn the sign in the small window of the door. The sign is painted wood, dark green, the letters slightly uneven in a way that you've always found endearing. One side says the shop is open. The other says it is closed, but that you'll be in tomorrow. You always put the second side forward, even though you've never changed the hours once in all the time you've been here. Some reassurances are worth repeating. You stand at the door for a moment, looking out through the glass at Sable Street. The fog is here now. You can see the way it softens the light of the lamp post at the corner. The lamp there, which is lit by whoever does the lighting at this hour. You've never been entirely sure who, only that they are reliable, glows through the fog as a warm, diffuse circle rather than a point. The cobblestones below it are wet, though you didn't hear any rain. The fog must have been thorough enough. Somewhere in the direction of the harbour, the bell rings the 3/4 hour. You turn back into the shop. There are still things to do before the evening is your own, but they are the pleasant kind of things. Not obligations exactly. More like gifts you've left yourself, tucked into the end of the workday, so that the transition between working and resting isn't a hard line but a gradual one, a softening. The first of these is the bottles. There is a crate on the workbench, a wooden crate, low-sided, lined with a piece of old linen, into which you've been placing the day's finished work. 3 sleep draughts in their small, dark blue bottles, stoppered with cork and sealed with a pale green wax that you melted yourself this morning. A pair of clarity tonics, the ones from the second batch, the ones that turned out right, slightly herbal, slightly sweet, with that clean feeling on the back of the throat that people always comment on afterward. And 1 grief-ease tea, the larger bottle, the amber one, with the wide cork and the careful label. That one took the most of you today. It always does. You lift the grief-ease bottle first. It is warm to the touch, the way these always are, not from the hearth but from the making of it. Something in the process leaves a warmth behind that outlasts the brewing by several hours. You hold it for a moment, feeling the weight of it, solid, generous, and then you set it upright on the correct shelf. 3rd from the left, 2nd shelf down, beside the other grief-ease bottles, of which there are 4 already. You have been busy with this particular preparation this season. October is often that kind of month. You don't linger on that thought. You simply note it and let it go. The clarity tonics go on the upper shelf, near the window that faces the alley, because the morning light that comes through that window is the colour that makes the pale amber glass look its best, and you have learned, in the years you have been keeping this shop, that the way things look matters. Not for vanity, but because a bottle that looks well tends to be picked up, and a bottle that is picked up tends to go home with someone who needs it. These things arrange themselves when you let them. The sleep draughts are last. You turn one of the dark blue bottles in your hand before shelving it. The glass is smooth, slightly cool to the touch now that the wax has set. The stopper fits snugly. You pressed it in yourself and tested it twice, because a sleep draught that spills in someone's pocket before they reach home is a wasted sleep draught and also a very sticky pocket. You approve of the stopper. You set the bottle on the shelf with its companions and step back. The shelf of sleep draughts is, you think, the most beautiful shelf in the shop. This is partly a practical matter. The dark blue glass holds colour well, and there is enough variety in the bottle shapes, some tall and narrow, some round-bellied, some with long necks, depending on what was available when you acquired them, that the shelf has a pleasant irregularity, a lived-in quality. But it is also something else. You have made every one of those small bottles with rest in mind, with a specific intention that someone, somewhere, will be able to close their eyes because of what is inside. That intention does something to the way the bottles sit on the shelf. Or so it seems to you on evenings like this one. You leave the shelf and go to wash your hands. The basin is in the back of the shop, past the workbench, in the narrow space between the storage room door and the wall. It is a stone basin, deep and wide, with a tap that runs cold. You have a small copper ewer of warm water that you keep on the edge of the hearth for hand-washing. You filled it this morning, and it has been quietly warming all day, and you pour it into the basin now and wash your hands slowly. The soap is the one you make yourself, with lavender and oat, and it lathers gently, and the water is the right temperature, not hot but not cool, just warm enough to feel like a small kindness. You take your time. This is important. Washing hands at the end of a working day in a potion shop. Not only for the practical reason, though there is a practical reason, there is always residue on the hands from an afternoon of preparation, and some of it should not be carried into the evening, but because it marks a threshold. Washing the hands says, "The work is done. What comes next belongs to you." You dry your hands on the linen cloth that hangs on the hook by the basin. It is a worn cloth, soft from many washings, and you fold it neatly when you are done and hang it back. The shop is quiet. The fire breathes. From somewhere above, from the rooms where you live, on the upper 2 floors of this narrow building on Sable Street, you can hear the sound of something settling. A beam, perhaps, contracting in the evening cold, or the window in the upstairs room that has never quite fit its frame and makes small sounds on windy nights. But tonight the sound is just the one soft creak, and then nothing. You stand in the middle of the shop and listen. The fire. The very faint movement of the fog against the window. The distant, muffled sound of the harbour. You can hear the boats tonight, just barely, the hollow knock of wood against wood as they move at their moorings, the water making that particular low sound that is not quite a lap and not quite a slosh but something in between. And below all of it, barely there, the way a note held too long becomes more feeling than sound. The harbour bell, still resonating from the last hour, still hanging in the air even though it rang some time ago. You breathe. The evening, you have decided, will be for the autumn comfort blend. This is not a commissioned preparation, not something anyone has asked for. It is a thing you make every year, at this exact point in the season, when the fog begins to come in earnest, and the leaves on the oak in Market Square have mostly let go, and the evenings have that particular quality of being both long and cosy, stretched out and lamplit. The autumn comfort blend is a tea, technically, though it does a little more than a tea usually does. It warms not just the body, but something adjacent to the body, some layer of the self that sits just inside the skin. It softens the edges of a difficult week. It makes people feel as though they have done enough for today. You sell it at the harvest fair. This year the fair is in 4 days, which means you have just enough time to brew a proper batch, let it rest, and bottle it into the small tin tins with the paper labels that you spend one evening each autumn writing by hand. The tins stack neatly in a crate that you have already set out by the workbench, just waiting. But tonight is not the bottling. Tonight is the brewing. You gather what you need from the shelves and from the hanging bundles at the ceiling, moving through the familiar geography of the shop without having to think much. Dried chamomile, a generous measure, into the wide-mouthed copper pot. Dried rose hip, crumbled fine. A small piece of dried orange peel, not the sharp, bright orange peel of summer fruit, but the muted, wine-dark kind that you dry yourself in autumn, and that smells warmer, softer, closer to spice than to citrus. A single star of dried anise, which you add carefully because too much will dominate everything, and two little adds only a whisper, and you are looking for something in between. Cinnamon bark, one small piece, which you snap between your fingers and smell before you add it. The smell of cinnamon bark, snapped fresh, is one of the better smells of the season. You hold it for just a moment. It smells like the kitchen of someone who loves you. It smells like the beginning of something warm. Into the pot. You add water from the ewer, fresh water, well water, carried up from the stone well in Market Square that morning, which means it still has that slight mineral sweetness of deep stone, and you set the pot on the hook over the fire. Not a high hook, a low one. The autumn comfort blend should not boil. It should barely simmer. It should be coaxed. You watch it for a moment. The water is still. The ingredients are still. The fire beneath it is steady and low. There is nothing to do yet but wait, and the waiting is not an empty thing but a full one. The blend is already beginning to work, in its way, the heat drawing the oils from the dried things, the water beginning to take them in. You can smell it already, barely, just the faintest edge of something warm and sweet beginning to rise from the pot. You go and make yourself a cup of ordinary tea. The tea is the easy kind, the everyday kind, a simple black tea, the sort that doesn't need measuring, that you know by feel and smell, that steeps in a chipped blue mug while you lean against the counter and let the evening settle around you. The mug has been yours for a very long time, long enough that the chip on the rim is familiar, long enough that your hand finds the same spot on the handle each time without looking. The glaze on the outside has a faint pattern of vines that has softened over the years into something more like a suggestion of vines, a memory of them, which you prefer to the original crispness. Worn things have their own beauty. You hold the mug in both hands. The warmth of it moves through your palms and up into your fingers, and you notice, the way you always notice on evenings like this one, how much of the day you spend with cool hands. How much of the work of this shop is cool work, the measuring and pouring and writing of labels. Only occasionally, only when you are at the hearth end of the bench, do your hands come back to a proper temperature. And now, with the tea, with the mug, your hands are warm again, and you are aware of it. Outside, a cart is passing on the lower end of Sable Street. You can hear the low rumble of its wheels on the wet cobblestone, the slow rhythm of it, steady and unhurried. The cart passes the corner, and the sound rounds itself around the building and fades. Quiet again. You sip the tea. It is not quite steeped enough yet, which means it is a little pale and a little weak, but you don't mind. You are not in a hurry. The steep will happen in its own time, and the next sip will be better, and the one after that better still, and by the time you reach the bottom of the mug it will have been exactly the cup of tea you wanted without you having had to do anything to make it so. This is the nature of patience, in small things. You hear the autumn comfort blend beginning to work across the shop. It is the faintest sound, the near silence of a liquid that is warming towards simmer but hasn't reached it yet, the very quiet breathing of the pot. Beneath the sound, the smell is strengthening. The rose hip is coming forward now, that faint tartness under the sweetness, and the cinnamon is steady and low, and the anise is there at the edges, just a whisper, exactly right. You breathe it in. The fire shifts. A small collapse of wood within the hearth, a brief brightening of the flame. Nothing dramatic, nothing that needs attention, just the fire doing what fires do over the course of an evening, settling into themselves. The brightness fades back to the steady low burn, and you watch it do so, and somewhere in watching it, you feel your own shoulders drop a degree. You hadn't noticed you were holding them. You take another sip of tea. You are still at the counter, the mug most of the way through, when you hear the knock at the door. It is a soft knock. Not urgent. Not the kind that sets your teeth on edge. More like the knock of someone who knows you are probably inside and just wants to let you know they are there, but who is perfectly content to wait, and would not blame you at all if you didn't answer. You set down the mug. You recognize the knock without thinking about it, the way you recognize the sound of a familiar voice through a wall, not by analyzing it, but by something more immediate than that, something that lives lower in the body. You are already moving toward the door before you've decided to, and you are already looking forward to it. Through the glass of the door, softened by the fog and the dark and the old glass itself, you can see Maren's silhouette. She is wearing her long wool coat, the deep grey one with the wide collar that she folds up when the weather is like this, and she is holding something in both hands, a shape you can't quite make out, but small and paper-wrapped. You unlock the door. "I thought you might still be awake," Maren said, stepping inside when you opened the door. The fog came in with her, briefly, a cold breath of it that curled around your ankles and then dissipated in the warmth of the shop. She smelled of the outside, of damp stone and night air and the faint sweet smell of the bakery on Cutter's Row, which meant she had been that direction tonight. "Come in," you said. "The fire's good." She followed you back to the counter, pulling her coat collar down and looking around the shop with the easy look of someone who has been in a place enough times to notice its small changes. Her gaze lingered for a moment on the new batch of sleep draughts on the upper shelf, then moved to the pot over the hearth. "Is that the autumn blend?" she said. "The first batch." You took the second mug from the hook beside the basin, an ordinary mug, less worn than yours, with no pattern and no chips, and poured her a cup of tea from the pot. "Then it's that time," Maren said. She accepted the mug and sat on the stool at the end of the counter, the one that has been unofficially hers for as long as you've known her, the one that sits a little lower than the rest due to a leg that was repaired once and never quite returned to its original height. She didn't seem to notice the unevenness. She never did. She set the paper-wrapped thing on the counter and slid it toward you. "From the Fenwicks," she said. "The honey cake. They had some left at the end of the day, and Petra asked me to bring it along, since she saw your light was still on when she was passing. The paper was folded neatly, and when you opened it the smell came up at once. Warm cake, sweet but not too sweet, with that particular depth that comes from good honey and from baking done with care. The cake was cut in 2 thick pieces, and it was still slightly warm in the centre. "Tell her thank you," you said. "She knows," Maren said, wrapping both hands around her mug. You ate one piece of the cake slowly, in small bites. It tasted of honey and something faintly spiced, not cinnamon exactly, but something in the same family, something warm and dry. The inside was soft. The outside had a slight crust, just enough to give it a little resistance before yielding. The fire settled again in its low, steady way. Maren was quiet, the way she sometimes was when she was comfortable somewhere, and you understood this kind of quiet and didn't try to fill it. The shop held you both. The smell of the autumn comfort blend was thickening now, richer, the rose hip and the cinnamon coming together into something that was more than either of them separately. After a while Maren said, "The fog's been sitting over the harbour all day." "It has," you said. I could see it from the window this morning. Never really lifted. She looked at her tea. I don't mind it. It makes the town feel smaller. You thought about that. Closer, you offered. Yes, she said. Closer is the right word. She was quiet again for a little while. The harbour bell rang the hour, 6 o'clock, the tones coming through the fog in that rounder way you'd noticed earlier, blurred at their edges, arriving as warmth rather than sound. You both listened to it without comment. 6 strokes, and then the silence settled back in around the shop like water finding its level. "Are you going to the fair?" Maren said. "Of course," you said. "Same spot as last year. Against the east wall of the square, under the oak. The oak will be bare by then. Probably. The last of the leaves are going." "I like it bare," Maren said after a moment. "It looks like it knows something." You didn't answer right away, just looked at her, and she smiled into her mug. "That sounds strange," she said. "No," you said. "It doesn't." She finished her tea in small sips, not hurrying. You refilled it once without asking, because her mug was getting low and the pot was still warm and it seemed like the right thing to do. She said thank you quietly. Outside, the fog thickened another degree, if that was possible, and Sable Street became even more of an impression of itself than a real place. The lamplight at the corner was softer now, a warm smear of gold in the grey. You checked the autumn comfort blend. You crossed to the hearth and crouched down slightly to look at the pot, and you could see now the faintest movement at the surface. Not a full simmer, not bubbles, but the water shivering slightly with heat, the ingredients moving in their slow way. The smell from this close was very good. It was everything you'd hoped for. The rose hip and the cinnamon and the anise, and under all of it the chamomile, steady and deep, doing its quiet work. You straightened. "It's coming along," you said to no one in particular, and Maren said from across the shop, which was the right response. She left not long after, her coat collar folded back up, one piece of honey cake wrapped back in its paper and tucked into her pocket for the walk home. She kissed you on the cheek at the door the way people in Thistlewick often did, and the brief cold of her cheek against yours was not unpleasant, just the reminder that there was weather outside, and that in here there was not. You closed the door. You locked it again. You stood for a moment in the quiet. Then you went back to the hearth and the blend and your own cup of tea, which had gone cold while Maren was here, and which you warmed again in the small pot without thinking much about it, because that is what an evening in the shop is for. An hour passed in a gentle way. You spent it doing small things. You went through the apothecary drawer, the shallow wooden drawer with the many small compartments, each one holding a different dried herb or powder or preparation, and you took stock of what was running low. Valerian root, getting light, you'd need to order more from Greenmere's before winter set in properly. Dried lemon balm, also low, though you had some drying in the storeroom upstairs, and it was nearly ready. The passion-flower tincture was good. You had a surplus from the summer batch, actually, more than you'd expected, and you'd need to work through it before spring. You wrote these things down in the small ledger that lives on the counter beside the scale. The ledger is old and thick, and most of it is full years of notes in your handwriting, which has changed somewhat over the decades, going from something careful and deliberate early on to something more settled, more itself, the way all handwriting does eventually if you use it enough. You found a blank page near the back and wrote in a tidy column, "Valerian, lemon balm, check upstairs, passion flower, surplus, use first in winter blends." That was enough of that. You closed the ledger. The blend on the fire was doing beautifully now. You could hear it, a very soft sound, a near whisper of movement in the liquid, the ingredients in slow conversation with each other. You lifted the lid of the pot and let the steam rise to your face. It was warm and fragrant, and for a moment you simply breathed it in, your eyes closed, your hands loose at your sides. The rose hip, the cinnamon, the anise, the chamomile, deep and steady underneath everything else, the way a good foundation makes itself known not by demanding attention but by being there. You set the lid back. The fire needed a small piece of wood, and you took one from the basket beside the hearth, a piece of apple wood again, the last of the small ones, which would burn fragrant and even for the next hour or so. You placed it carefully, not disturbing what was already burning, just offering the fire something to work toward. The fire accepted it. You washed the copper pot from earlier in the day, the one that had held the third clarity tonic attempt. The pot needed more than a quick rinse. There was some residue from the bitter herbs in the first stage of the recipe, a faint greenish cast at the bottom that took a little work to remove. You didn't rush. You worked at it in a methodical way, the way you've always found cleaning a pot somewhat meditative, the repetitive motion of it, the gradual return of the copper's warm colour, the steam rising from the warm water in the basin. By the time you were done, the pot was back to its ordinary self, glowing softly in the firelight, and you set it on the drying rack and stood back. The clock on the shelf, the small brass one, the one that you wound once a week on Sunday evenings, and that had kept reliable time for as long as you could remember, read 7:15. It was later than you'd thought. Not too late. Not an unpleasant late. Just the kind of late that means the evening is well along, that the night has settled itself properly around the town, that the time between now and bed is a comfortable distance rather than an enormous one. The second knock of the evening came a few minutes after 7:30. This one was different from Maren's, a little heavier, a little slower, with a pause between the first knock and the second that gave it the quality of someone being very deliberate about not disturbing you. You already knew who it was. Bramble Ost knocked like that. He was a man who had spent his whole life in the service of other people's comfort, running the Thistle Tide, feeding people, giving them rooms and fires and conversation when they needed it, and somewhere along the way he had developed a manner that communicated consideration in every small thing. Even the way he knocked said, "I know you might be busy, and I can come back." You opened the door. He was a large man, Bramble Ost, not broad in an imposing way, broad in the way of someone who has done physical work his whole life and simply settled into the shape of it. He had a grey beard that he kept neat and dark eyes that were, as ever, a little tired but also warm. He was wearing his heavy coat, the dark brown one that had seen at least 20 winters, and he was holding his hat in both hands in front of him in a way that was endearing without meaning to be. "Good evening," he said. "I'm sorry for the hour." "The hour is fine," you said, and stepped back to let him in. "Come out of the fog." He came in, ducking slightly from long habit at the lintel. The doorway was not actually low enough to require ducking, but he was the sort of person who had been ducking doorways in his life and had developed the reflex. He looked around the shop with a comfortable expression. "It smells good in here," he said. "What's that?" Autumn Comfort Blend, you said. First batch of the year. For the fair. Ah, he said, with the warm recognition of someone who knew this blend and had opinions about it. That's what I needed to smell. I've been on my feet since 5. Sit down, you said. There's tea. He sat, not on Maren's stool, which he had never in all the years you'd known him chosen to use, but on the low bench near the south wall, the one that was there for customers who needed a moment. It was a good bench for Bramble Ost. It suited him. He set his hat down beside him and put his hands on his knees and looked at the fire. I have a guest, he said. You said, pouring tea. Been here 3 days. One of the fishing boats put in early because of the weather, and she was on it. Not a sailor, just someone travelling along the coast. Waiting for the next boat. Anyway, she's not sleeping well. You brought him the tea. He accepted it with both hands and a quiet sound of gratitude. Not sleeping at all, you said. Sleeping, he said. Just not well. She comes down in the morning looking like she hasn't, and she mentioned to my wife last night that she'd been awake at 2 and again at 4, just lying there. Nothing wrong, no pain, no worry that she said of. Just not sleeping. You leaned against the counter and thought about it. How old? Bramble considered. Old as us, I'd say. Maybe a few years on it. And she's been well otherwise? Eating. Eating like a sailor, he said, with a quiet smile. The chowder's apparently very good. He said this without any particular pride, though the pride was there underneath the words. You pushed back from the counter and went to the sleep-draught shelf. You looked at the row of dark blue bottles in the firelight for a moment, thinking. The standard sleep-draught was good. It was what most people needed, what most people asked for, a gentle and reliable deepening of sleep, nothing more. But for someone sleeping poorly without obvious cause, travelling in an unfamiliar bed, you thought something slightly different might serve better. I have something for her, you said, but it's not the standard draught. Tell me, said Bramble. There's a preparation I make a few times a year. Not a draught exactly, more of a tea, though it does more than a tea. It's for when the body is willing to sleep, but the mind keeps pulling it back. When the sleep is there but shallow. You turned away from the shelf and went to a different cabinet, a smaller one on the east wall, one that you kept closed during shop hours because what was in it was more specialized and people sometimes got ideas. It has valerian in it, but the valerian is balanced with something else. Passion flower, and a small amount of the blue poppy preparation, which is mild, very mild, nothing to worry about. What it does is soften that pulling. The shallow sleep gets deeper. The body gets what it's actually trying to get. Bramble listened to this carefully, the way he always listened to things, fully, without hurrying toward a response. That sounds like exactly right, he said. She should drink it an hour before bed, you said. In warm water, or warm milk if she has it. It tastes slightly of anise, so she should know that. Not unpleasant, just present. You found the bottle you were looking for. It was a small bottle, a slightly different shape from the standard sleep draughts, wider, flatter, with a cork tied in place with a bit of twine because the cork had a tendency to loosen otherwise. You carried it back to the counter. How much? Bramble said, meaning the cost. You told him. It was not a large amount. The work was real, and the ingredients were not cheap, but you had never charged what you could have charged at this shop, and you weren't going to start now. He reached into his coat and produced a purse. "Take a little more," he said, when you'd counted out the right amount. "Bramble, take a little more," he said gently, with the finality of a man who had done this before and intended to do it again. "For the trouble of the hour. You took a little more." He stood, picked up his hat, looked at the fire once more. "Will you be at the fair?" he said. "Under the oak. East wall. I'll bring the wife," he said. "She's been talking about the autumn blend since last year." He paused. "She'll be glad to hear you're making it. I'll tell her I saw the pot. Tell her the first batch is a good one," you said. He smiled, one of his slow, warm smiles, and put on his hat and went out. The fog came in around him, and then the door was closed, and he was gone, and the shop was quiet again. You stood holding the coins and thinking about nothing very particular, just the soft, comfortable shape of the evening, the way it had filled itself in without effort. Then you put the coins in the drawer and went to check on the blend. It was ready to come off the heat. You knew it the way you always knew it, not by looking at it, or not primarily by looking, but by the smell of it. There was a point in the making of the Autumn Comfort blend when the smell changed slightly, deepened from something promising into something complete, the way a piece of bread going from almost baked to properly baked changed the quality of the air in the room. It had happened while Bramble was here, sometime between his arrival and his departure, and now the blend was sitting in the pot at exactly the right place. You lifted it from the hook. The pot was warm, and you carried it carefully, both hands, one on the handle and one supporting the bottom, and you set it on the stone rest on the workbench. The liquid inside was a deep amber, the rose hip giving it that colour, with something darker from the dried orange peel, all of it richer now than it had been when you'd put the ingredients in. It looked, in the firelight, like something that had been here a very long time. You took out the strainer. The straining was careful work. You had a fine mesh strainer that had been in the shop for years, and you set it over a clean glass vessel, large, round-bottomed, the kind made for this, and you poured the blend through slowly, letting it find its own pace. The liquid came through clear and warm, the amber deepening as it collected in the vessel. The solid stayed behind in the strainer, the spent chamomile, the soft pieces of rose hip, the cinnamon bark, the anise. You let the strainer drain for a little while. Then you covered the vessel with a clean cloth and moved it to the cool end of the workbench, where it would rest overnight. Tomorrow you would check it, warm a small amount in a spoon and taste it, make any small adjustments, a little more rose hip, perhaps, or a touch more cinnamon, and then you would bottle it. Not tonight. Tonight the blend needed to rest, needed to settle into itself, needed the darkness and the quiet to become fully what it was. This was the part of the work you could not rush. You were glad of it. You cleaned the pot, the strainer, the glass vessels outside where the blend had dripped slightly when you poured. Each in turn, in the basin, with warm water and the lavender soap that always faintly scented your hands afterward, and you did the cleaning without hurry and without impatience, and when you were done everything was in its place, and the shop smelled of the blend and the chamomile and the beeswax, all of it layered together, and you stood in the middle of it and breathed. The third knock came a little before 9. This one was very soft. 3 small taps, almost apologetic. You had been sitting by the fire with a new cup of tea and the second piece of Petra Fenwick's honey cake when you heard it, and you looked up from the book you'd been only half reading and considered whether you'd actually heard something. 3 small taps again. You went to the door. Through the glass you could see a slight figure wrapped in a large coat that was clearly not her own. The sleeves were turned back several times, and the shoulders hung too wide, and a long woolen scarf the colour of dried sage. Her name was Issy Fenwick, Petra's youngest, 17 years old, and the kind of young person who moved through the world with a quality of thoughtfulness that you had always quietly admired. She was looking down at her boots, waiting. You opened the door. "I'm so sorry," Issy said, immediately. "I know you're closed. I could see your light, and I almost didn't knock, but grandmother said—" She stopped. "I have a small problem," she said. "Come in," you said. "What kind of small problem?" She came in, and the smell of the outside came with her. Cold air and fog and, unmistakably, the bakery. She stood in the warmth of the shop and pulled the scarf from around her neck and looked at the fire with the relieved expression of someone who has been cold. "It's grandmother's hands," she said. "The cold's been bothering them. Not the joints exactly. She says the joints are fine. It's something else. She says they feel like they're very far away." You understood what she meant. It was a common complaint in late autumn in Thistlewick, among people of a certain age whose circulation had grown quieter over the years. Not painful, not worrying, just distant. The hands doing their work, but without the feeling in them, the warmth having gone elsewhere. "Sit down," you said. Issy sat on the bench where Bramble Ost had sat, pulling the large coat around herself. She was a person who was always slightly cold, as far as you could tell. She looked at the row of bottles with the frank curiosity of someone who has always wanted to ask about them. "There's a preparation for that," you said. "I don't always have it ready, but I made a batch in September." You were already moving toward the right cabinet, the one on the east wall. "It's a warming oil, something she'd rub into her hands before bed and perhaps in the morning. Capsicum and ginger in a base of sunflower. Nothing complicated, but the capsicum especially does good work for the kind of cold she's describing." "Will it smell very strong?" Issy said. You considered. "Of ginger." "Yes, but pleasant ginger not. You thought of how to describe it. Not a sharp smell. A warm one." "She won't mind ginger," Issy said. "She puts it in everything." You found the bottle. A small round bottle with a flat bottom and a cork that you sealed with a piece of cloth tied in place, because this was an oil and oils had a way of finding any gap in their containment. You carried it back to the bench and sat down across from Issy and held it up so she could see. "She puts a small amount on her palms and rubs them together," you said. "Slowly, like this." You demonstrated, your own hands moving in the slow circle that distributed the oil and the warmth together, and she lets it sit for a few minutes before touching anything else, because it will stain fabric if it's still wet. Issy watched the demonstration with that thoughtful attention of hers. "And it will help," she said. "I expect so," you said. "Most of the time it helps. If it doesn't, or if the cold gets worse or moves from the hands into her chest or her feet, she should come and talk to me herself, or tell your family and have them tell me." "I'll tell her," Issy said. She took the bottle carefully, turned it over in her hands. "Thank you." She was going to come herself, but I told her I'd go, because— She stopped. "Because the fog, you said." Issy looked up. She doesn't like the fog much. Since Dad. A pause. It's been a few years. She's mostly all right. But sometimes the fog. You looked at her steadily and kindly, and you did not rush to fill the small silence she had left there. "Tell her the fog will lift," you said after a moment. "It always does. And when it does, the light is very clear afterward." Issy looked at you for a moment, and then down at the bottle in her hands. "I'll tell her that," she said. You named the price of the oil, which was modest, and Issy paid it from a small purse in her coat pocket, and then stood to go, winding the sage-coloured scarf back around herself. "Tell your mother the honey cake was very good," you said. "Both pieces." Issy smiled, a quick, bright smile, the kind that lit her face and then was gone, which made it more precious rather than less. "She'll be glad," she said, and then she was out the door, and the fog closed around her, and Sable Street was quiet. You stood for a long moment in the middle of the shop, hands at your sides, and let the quiet settle. It was a full quiet now, the kind that comes at the end of a well-used evening, when everyone who was going to come by has come and gone, and everything that needed to be done has been done, and what remains is only your own company and the fire and the smell of the blend cooling in its vessel on the workbench. The clock said 9:10. You thought about going up to the rooms above. You thought about the bed up there, and the way the pillow on the left side had a particular quality, slightly softer than the one on the right, from years of use, and the sound that the building made at night when the fog pressed against the windows and the old wood contracted gently in the chill. But not yet. You sat by the fire. You picked up the book you'd been half reading, a slim volume about the history of herbalism in the coastal towns, the kind of book that has passages you read again and again, not because you need the information, but because the writing has a particular quality, an unhurried quality, a quality that lets you slow down to match it. You opened it to a page somewhere in the middle, a passage about the cultivation of valerian in sheltered coastal gardens, and you read it in the firelight. The fire was lower now, not in need of anything. It would hold as it was until you went to bed and banked it, but lower than it had been at the start of the evening, the applewood logs burned through and the coals doing most of the work. The orange at the heart of it was deep now, almost red, pulsing very slowly. You read. Or you held the book and let your eyes move over the words, and some of them came in, and some of them only brushed the surface, and that was entirely fine. You were not trying to remember them. You were just letting them pass through. The clock ticked. The fire breathed. From very far away, from the harbour, which you could not see and could barely hear, there was the hollow sound of a boat settling at its mooring, one slow note and then silence. And then the harbour bell, which you had stopped counting hours ago, rang the half. You closed the book. The closing up of a shop at the end of a long evening is a different thing than the closing at the beginning. The beginning of the closing is practical, putting things away, locking the door, turning the sign. But the second closing, the deeper one, the one that happens when the visitors have gone and the work is done, and you are simply letting the day come to its end, that one is something else. You moved through it slowly. You went to the workbench and checked on the blend one more time, lifted the cloth from the vessel and let the smell come up, rose-hip and cinnamon and the deep chamomile note below everything, and the blend was resting as it should be, had begun to cool and settle, had deepened another shade. Tomorrow it would be ready. Tonight it only needed to be left alone. You replaced the cloth. You went around the shop once, not looking for anything in particular, just looking, the way you had looked earlier in the evening, when the amber light was in the window. The shelves were as you'd left them. The bottles stood in their rows, their colours muted in the low firelight, amber and green and blue, all of them soft, all of them holding their own quiet weight. You paused at the sleep draught shelf. One bottle fewer than before Bramble had come by. The gap where it had been was small, noticeable only because you knew exactly how the shelf had looked before. You thought of his guest at the Thistle Tide, the woman waiting for the next boat south. You thought of her lying in her unfamiliar bed, and of the bottle of the passion-flower preparations sitting on her nightstand, and of the sleep that was coming for her tonight. The deep, real sleep. The kind that actually worked. You hoped it served her well. You took your candle from the counter. The candle was one of the ordinary ones, a short stub of beeswax in a plain holder, and you used the lit candle on the counter to light it before pinching that one out. Then you crossed to the hearth. Banking the fire for the night was something you had done so many times that you did it by feel as much as by sight. You arranged the coals with a small iron tool, pulling them inward toward the centre, building a low mound of them that would hold heat through the night, and then you set the iron grate close against the opening, not to block the air entirely, but to slow its passage. The fire would be deep coals by morning. You would open the grate and add wood, and it would come back without difficulty. You did not say good night to the fire. That would be silly. But you did look at it for a long moment before you turned away. The shop was very warm and very still, and smelled deeply of everything it had held that day. The blend and the beeswax and the old herbs and the lingering edge of Maren's wool coat and Bramble's cold evening smell and Issy's bakery-scented hair. The day had passed through here. It had left itself behind. You picked up the candle and went to the stairs. The stairs in this building, like the stairs in many old buildings in Thistlewick, had opinions. The third step had a creak in it that you had meant to address at some point, but which you had also, if you were being fair, come to feel some affection for. It announced your arrival in the upstairs rooms in a quiet and reliable way. Not a warning exactly, more of a greeting, more of a here you are and here I am. The creak came as you stepped on it. Here you are. Here I am. The upstairs landing was dark except for the candle. The window at the end of the hall was grey with fog, the lamplight from the street below a dim and distant glow, and the cold was present here in a way it was not in the shop. Not bitter, not unkind, just the neutral cold of an unheated hallway in late autumn, the kind that makes you aware of the warmth behind you and the warmth ahead. You went to the bedroom. The room was simple and familiar. The bed against the north wall, with its thick wool blanket that you had owned for many years, in the particular shade of blue-grey that had always seemed to you like fog made solid. The window with the bad fit, the one that made soft sounds on windy nights, though tonight the wind was low, and the sound was only the faintest creak in the wood of the frame. There was a small rug on the floor beside the bed, worn soft over years of bare feet in the morning. A round braided rug, the kind that Thistlewick people had been making for generations, the colours mostly indistinguishable now from use. The table by the window where you kept your own small things, a cup you never used but liked to have there, a sprig of dried lavender, a book you were working through more slowly than any book you'd read before, which was fine, which was exactly right. You set the candle on the table. In the candlelight, the room was warm and gold and very small, in the way of rooms that are exactly the right size. You sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress received you with the particular familiarity of something shaped to you over years of use. The wool blanket was slightly cool at its surface, and you knew it would be warm all the way through within minutes, because it had always been this way. The window at the end of the hall shifted once in the cold air. The fog sat heavy against the glass. Somewhere far below, down all of Sable Street and through Market Square and down the lanes toward the harbour bell rang the hour. 10 o'clock. The strokes came through the fog like things wrapped in wool, soft and round, coming from a very great distance, and you lay down on the bed and listened to them and counted without meaning to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and somewhere in the counting the town became very still, and the fog held everything in its quiet grey arms, and you could hear the fire still doing its low work down in the shop below you, and the buildings settling into the night around you, and the sound of your own breathing, slow and even and soft. The candle on the table made a small, continuous warmth. You thought, briefly, about the autumn comfort blend resting in its vessel on the workbench, about the harvest fair in 4 days, the square full of people in their wool coats, the oak's bare branches overhead, the stalls bright with autumn colours, about your spot against the east wall, the folding table with its cloth, the tins of blend lined up in their rows, the small hand-lettered sign, about Maren stopping by in her grey coat, about Bramble and his wife, who liked the blend. You thought about Issy walking home through the fog with the warming oil in her pocket, about old Petra Fenwick's hands, the cold in them, the distance of them, and about the oil working its way in over the next few days, the warmth coming back, slowly, the way warmth always did come back in time. You thought about these things the way you thought about things at the end of a day, loosely, without holding on, letting them drift past in no particular order, each one present for a moment and then releasing itself. The shop below was quiet. The blend was resting. The fire was banked. The door was locked. Sable Street was fog and lamplight and wet cobblestones and the very faint sound of the harbour. Always there, always that same low note, the water talking to itself in its patient way. The candle on the table made a small, continuous warmth. Your hands were warm. The wool blanket was warm. The whole narrow building on Sable Street, its crooked shelves and worn counters, and the second shelf from the bottom that always tilted 2 degrees to the left, and the small window that had a private arrangement with the sun, was full of the smell of beeswax and chamomile and rose hip and cinnamon, and the deep, settled smell of a place that has been loved for a very long time. Outside, the fog moved. It moved the way fog moves, not with intention, but with the slow and steady quality of something that has all the time in the world. It moved over the harbour and through Market Square and around the old oak's bare branches and down Fenwick Lane and past Greenmere's and the Thistle Tide and the chandlery and the library boat-house, where Bindle the cat was sleeping, as he always slept, in the chair by the cast-iron stove. It moved over all of it, the fog, softly, completely, without hurry. Thistlewick settled. The harbour bell did not ring. There was nothing to ring for. Everything was quiet, and the quiet was a good one, the kind that has room in it, the kind that holds rather than presses, and you were in it, and the warmth was all around you, and the shop was full of the good smell of work well done. Your breathing slowed. The candle on the table held its small warm light. Outside, the fog. Inside, the warmth. And somewhere in the space between them, that soft, familiar threshold between the day and the not-yet-day, you let go of the evening the way you always let go of things at this hour. Gently, completely, without hurry.